We are starting now.
Yes, ma'am.
Good morning and a warm welcome to everyone present here today. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. I am Olivia Disa, the Alumni Coordinator of DBIT and one of your hosts of the day. Today, we are presenting our third webinar on navigating the post-COVID Masters Maze by one of our alumnus of batch 2017, Mr. Varun Chouthkanthiwar. If you have any questions during the session, please type them into the chat box or the WhatsApp group. We will be taking your questions during the Q&A round after the session. Before moving forward, I would like to take this opportunity to invite our dearest principal, Dr. Prasanna Nambiar ma'am, to address the crowd and speak a few words on our speaker for today, Mr. Varun. Welcome, ma'am.
Good morning, everybody. And Varun, a very, very good morning to you. I do not know what time of the day it is for you over there. Probably or nearly bedtime?
It's 1 a.m.
It's
a little past bedtime.
So first and foremost, I must thank you for staying up till so late in the night to address all our students. So everyone who has joined in, a very good morning to all of you. And it's my pleasure to say a few words about Varun. But before I get into that, I would also like to thank this wonderful initiative being taken by the alumni committee, the team that has worked towards the faculty team as well as the student team. I think they have done a wonderful job in ensuring that we have the right kind of people who are talking to our students. And many of the questions that the students would have regarding the uncertainty of studying abroad and what are the issues that they would need to face. And now, in addition to COVID, we also have a socio-political emergency happening in the United States. So obviously, parents have a lot of questions to ask. Students have a lot of questions to ask. And I'm glad that at this point of time, we have somebody like Varun out over here. Because let me tell you a couple of things about Varun. Varun is an extremely articulate person, which is very, very rare for a mechanical engineer. I have seen articulate students in other branches of engineering, but I think mechanical guys are more of brawn and muscle. And in that, Varun is an extremely articulate person. I have not only been his teacher, but I have also been his project guide and his team. There were three others in the team. They did a wonderful project, and that project was aimed towards the tribals of Valvanda. So in today's COVID times, and when we are talking about social engineering as one of the prime roles in which a student of DBIT finds herself, I think the project that they did was extremely relevant. It went on to win quite a few awards, got a lot of recognition from people around, and more importantly, the women in the village were very, very excited. It's unfortunate that, because of time constraints, they were not able to, they completed the entire project, but they were supposed to work on the project with using a lighter material, which now is being taken forward by a bunch of other students. While on campus, yes, Varun was one of the very popular students of mechanical department. He was very, very, very much an active participant in the NSS and all other social and cultural initiatives that were taken by the department. So in that sense, I think Varun had a presence across the campus, and probably practically everybody, all faculty members and students knew him. And it was not very surprising that when he chose to go abroad, he decided to get into an area which was very close to his heart, which was on innovation, design, creativity. and he studied at one of the finest universities in the United States, the Carnegie Mellon University. He has recently completed his master's, and I understand that he has taken up a job in a venture capital organization, Varun, which comes as a bit of a surprise to me, because I thought you would go all out as a designer and probably work in that area. But I guess, yes, one probably starts somewhere and then one doesn't know where one ends. But it's such a pleasure to have Varun out over here. And apart from being a very articulate person, Varun is also very sensitive. In that context, his presence today is very important, because I guess he would be talking to you about issues which probably might escape the eyes of many others in a similar situation. So before Varun starts, I would like to tell everybody that you could probably ask him questions which are related not only to the technology aspects but also the social aspects, the environmental aspects, and what are the prospects for these in the United States, or after one chooses to come back. So once again, I would like to congratulate the alumni team, the students, especially the students of EXTC, who have been doing a wonderful job of hosting this entire event, and welcoming all of you once again to this webinar. I now hand over the mic to Olivia. Olivia, back to you.
Thank you, ma'am. We're so grateful to have you with us in all our events. Your positivity and encouragement truly brightens our days. Now, without any further ado, we will turn the time over to our speaker for today, Mr. Varun. Mr. Varun is an alumnus of DBIT's Department of Mechanical Engineering. He currently works as a venture capital associate in New York City. He received his master's in Engineering and Technology, Innovation Management, ETIM, from Carnegie Mellon University. Varun focuses on early stage startups in the consumer and healthcare industries. Over to you, Mr. Varun. Now, without any further ado, we will turn the time over to our speaker for today, Mr. Varun. Mr. Varun is an alumnus of DBIT's Department of Mechanical Engineering. He currently works as a venture capital associate in New York City. He received his master's in Engineering and Technology, Innovation Management, ETIM, from Carnegie Mellon University. Varun focuses on early stage startups in the consumer and healthcare industries. Over to you, Mr. Varun.
Thank you, Olivia. Can the DBIT host please share the presentation? Thank you. Firstly, let me apologize for the error that just happened. Our internet server went down. Unfortunately, we can't seem to find out what the problem is. Anyway, but I can continue from here on, and hopefully nothing should go wrong. So like Olivia said, I am a graduate of Don Bosco from the 2017 mechanical engineering batch. I did my master's at Carnegie Mellon University. After that, graduated in the summer of last year. And I've been working in New York in the venture capital space since then. I focus on sourcing early stage startups in the consumer and healthcare spaces. And currently, I'm helping a smaller investment firm set up their investment sourcing funnel. Today, I want to talk more about what it is like to do your master's from the US. But given what has happened over the last 3 months, there are a lot more things I believe that students should consider before they decide to do their master's or even fly to the US. And I imagine among the audience, there are students who have gotten their master's admits currently, and there will be others who are hoping to apply in the next year or the next 2 years. And I want to cover topics that, for starters, I didn't know when I was applying for my master's. So I think those are important that students today should know. In addition to that, if you've already been accepted into a program, I wanted to cover some of the aspects of what more research you should do, what more you should think about before you finally decide to get on a plane and come over to the US. Can we go to the next slide? So most of you will probably already know that back in March, almost all of the universities shut down and the students went home, to the extent that some of the foreign students even had to leave the country so that they could pursue their classes online from their home countries. And it is only now, over the last couple of weeks or so, that the universities are actually talking about when and how to reopen. And nothing is concrete yet. Only a few universities have actually come up with plans as to what they're going to do. The others are more along the lines of, yes, we will have some on campus activities, the other classes will be remote, and we're still looking at how the coronavirus situation turns out, based on which we will take future decisions. So that has created a lot of uncertainty, not just for the universities, but also for the students. And based on what program you're going for and what university that program is at, you will have to consider a number of things. So, for example, I have highlighted New York University, who says that they plan to resume their classes, but as far as possible, they will try to accommodate online resources as well. My university, Carnegie Mellon University, released a circular last week, and they said that they will be starting classes on schedule. However, in the midterm break, which is around Thanksgiving, they won't have students come back, because then they are expecting a second wave to hit if students move all over the country during the break and then come back to study on campus. So steps like these have, like I said before, created a lot of uncertainty for the universities themselves. And I imagine going forward, there are going to be a lot of restrictions on all of the activities that the universities do as part of their yearly curriculum. So, mainly seminars, conferences, job fairs, which are a very important part of student life on campus, those are either not going to be held, or they're going to be held very differently. And I know universities are able to do virtual job fairs right now, but the problem is that in a physical job fair, you actually meet a lot more people. You're able to talk to representatives from various companies, and that level of interaction is not possible if the job fair is conducted online. Similarly, research labs are being affected. Although most universities have said that they will focus on beginning their research activities first, then classes, even in person research and in person activities, fests that the universities do, these are going to be affected at least for the next semester, possibly for the whole of the next academic year. So, those are a few things to consider. After that, if you were deciding to go to a university like New York University, which is in the middle of Manhattan, you have to consider the fact that these universities are in very populated areas. So, as some people are saying, if we do see a second wave in the fall or even after that, some of these universities are going to be the most affected. So, one consideration is that if you have an admit from a university that happens to be in a very populated city, you might want to reconsider going for your master's this year itself. However, on the flip side, what is going to happen is that a lot of classes are going to move online. And over the last few years, United States universities have been increasing their course fees and their general pricing, which means that a lot of universities and a lot of programs are more or less priced out of the market. And because of that, students, especially American students, are expected to either take a drop year or what they call a gap year, and then come back a year or two from now, between now and then, where they will do things like volunteer with the Peace Corps or go work at a job or volunteer somewhere else. And that eventually means that people who are on the wait list for their admissions currently have a good chance of getting in. So if you were on the wait list for one of your ambitious universities, there is a decent chance that you might get in. However, your university might not have in-person classes to the full extent for the entire of the next academic year, which means that you have to take a very informed view of whether you want to move to the US given the current situation in this year. So how do you decide that? Can we go to the next slide? For the most part, students decide to do their masters for three reasons. One is to one is to do research and gain expertise in your own field. These students usually go for thesis-based masters or even PhD programs. The second category of students are the ones who want to gain exposure to a new field. So people like me who graduated in mechanical engineering but now work in an investment space, or one of my friends who also graduated mechanical engineering, but then he did an MIS program at one of the universities here, and now he works as a data analyst. So there is a separate level of considerations for all of those students who want to switch over to a new field via their masters. And then the third category of students is usually those who want to come to the US because of the job market. Now, this is one of the main considerations, meaning that the recession that US experts are currently predicting, that is going to affect this third category of master students the most. And how do you tackle this? Can we go to the next slide? If you were going to do a research-based master's or a PhD program, like I said before, there is an opportunity to go ahead if you're moved up from the waitlist. There is another thing that I think these students should consider, and it is that research-based programs typically take longer. So even if you have to spend the first semester in India or at home, even if you come to the US and do all of your coursework and your thesis work online, that is still fine because you have a year or a year and a half to make up for all the on-campus activities. And while you're getting your master's, the economy will invariably improve, and you can gauge it as you progress through your master's. So you will not be thrown into the job market as soon as people who go for a 1 year program or a 1.5 year program. And that means you're relatively safer in terms that you can watch and learn how the economy progresses and then take an informed decision based on how the job market is at the time you graduate. The other thing is that if you do a thesis based master's or a PhD, you are more or less in a very niche field. And only people with your academic qualifications are the ones going to look for the jobs that you look for. So your jobs might not be affected as opposed to a program that has 200 students who graduate with more or less the same profile. Now, if you belong to the second category and wanted to switch over to a different field, in my sense, it might be better to gain experience first and watch the market for about a year or so. The reason is that the job market operates on booms and busts. And over the last decade or more, the US economy was in a boom, and companies were expanding their hiring programs. They were investing in different fields. Data analysts from MIS programs were being hired by the dozens over the last few years. However, in the bust cycle, for starters, companies are trying to reduce costs. They're laying off or furloughing huge numbers of their employees, which means that even if you wanted to switch to a new field, there's going to be a lot more experienced professionals up ahead of you who want the same job. And right now, because of the cost cutting going on, a lot of companies, one of the best bets for them is an experienced employee with a non-compete agreement and who's willing to work for 20 to 60% less than what they would have to pay him or her almost just 3 months ago. So if you were looking to gain experience in a field, in a relatively new field, this might not be the best chance to dive into your master's. You might want to wait for a year or two, see how the economy turns out, see what the job situation is, and then take the decision. And the reason I highlight this is because, can we go to the next slide? This is a chart from the labor market released by the US Bureau of Labor Statistics just last week. And I want to highlight the blue area around 2008 to 2010, when it took almost 2 years to reach the highest level of unemployment, but it actually took a lot more than that to start to get back to normal. And right now, we are at a much higher level than that. If you move to the extreme right, the unemployment levels are extremely high. A lot of people are either furloughed or out of a job, and it is going to take possibly a lot longer for the economy to start stabilizing. And when you're a foreign student, you have a lot of restrictions on your work authorization that make it harder for you to find a suitable job in a bust market. And I will cover some of that later. But essentially, what I'm trying to say is that if you were trying to move to a new field, like I said before, this might not be the best time. You might want to wait and watch. Can we go to the next slide? Likewise, if you were only moving to the US and doing your master's to be able to work in the US market, a similar scenario applies to you. Jobs are not in abundance right now. Not to mention that over the last few years, there have been almost 200,000 Indian students every year entering the US job market. The H-1B system is overflowing. Not all of the employers will be willing to sponsor visas. And even if they do sponsor your visa, the timeline to actually get to a permanent residency, which is a green card, is very long. So my advice to those who wanted to explore the US job market is the same. Please proceed with caution. Watch the market for a year or two. And a good proxy is probably the Indian market, because from what I hear, and there might be people who know better at this moment in time, but from what I hear, companies in India are also laying off employees. They're trying to save costs as well, either through cuts in wages or complete layoffs. So when you start to see that Indian companies are hiring again, that might be a good proxy for what's happening in the US market as well. And that's when you start to explore again whether you want to do a master's or not. And while all of this is happening, getting that experience in the field that you want is never a bad thing. When you come to do your master's, your experience will almost always give you a positive advantage. And I have seen this happen to quite a few of my friends. They were exclusive to the software development field, but the ones that had two, maybe 2.5, 3 years of experience actually doing software development before they came over to an integrated business masters, they were the first people to land jobs. So that is probably the trend that will continue even going forward. So do not discount the experience that you get if you decide to stay back in the Indian market right now. Can we go to the next slide? Here, I wanted to cover some of the post-graduation employment considerations that a lot of students do not know. So what happens when you get into a STEM program, which stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, is that after you graduate, you're authorized to work for 3 years. But they don't just give you the authorization. What happens is they give you 1 year of a work permit. At the end of that 1 year period, you have to reapply to get it extended, and then you get 2 more years. And the other difference is that when you get your 1 year of employment authorization, it's relatively easy to find a job because they make those requirements very lax, in the sense that you can volunteer, you can work at an internship, you can work unpaid jobs, as long as you properly report the kind of employment that you're on, and that you're able to justify that what work you're doing is directly relevant to the degree that you got, you should be fine. But as soon as you ask for that extension of 2 years, those requirements change. And they change in that now you're not allowed to work for no pay. You're not allowed to volunteer. And you have to give a lot more justification in writing as to why the job that you're doing is relevant to the degree that you got. And all of these reporting requirements are very strict. The USCIS, which is the organization that oversees all of these activities for foreign students, the USCIS is very strict about these regulations. They have very concise guidelines of reporting your employment. And if you fall afoul of those guidelines, your status can be terminated, you can be deported, and they can launch an inquiry against your employer. So employers and students who are on their OPT are very, very careful of what kind of employment they seek and what kind of employment they report. And I did not know this before I applied to my master's. Not that it was a shock, but to have known all of the hoops that I have to jump through in order to get a job that is suitable to be reported relevant to my degree. All of this information, if I had known beforehand, I might have done some things differently. Now, the advantage you have is that all of this information is very clearly given on the USCIS website. It is also explained very well on a lot of university websites. So you can go online and try to find out all of this information. You do not need to know every single thing in the STEM OPT guidelines right now, but to know that it's not easy to find a job and to know that your reporting requirements are going to be harder, I think that is important even as you're applying for your master's. Can we go to the next slide? And I think we've lost the screen share. One other thing that I wanted to highlight, especially with regards to STEM OPT, is that the USCIS regulates how many days you can be unemployed while you're on your OPT. If you're in your first year, the maximum number of days is 90. If you get your extension of 2 years, then they give you 60 more days that you can be unemployed for. Now, in a job market like this, where everybody is looking for a new job, it's very easy to run out of those days. 150 days seems like a lot, but when you're competing with 200,000 students, and those are just Indian students, those days can go by quickly. So I would encourage students to remember these kind of things, even if they do decide to come out for the masters when they apply for their job. And then, like I said before, there are a lot of changes in reporting requirements when you switch over to your OPT. So students should bear that in mind. Can we go to the next slide? So how would you get all of this information, and how do you make an informed decision on whether you want to come over to the US this year or next year? The first advice that I would give all of the students is start networking. Your best friend is LinkedIn. Create a profile, start following topics that you are interested in from a career perspective. Follow the industry thought leaders, see what they're talking about. Don't just look for jobs on LinkedIn. That's like one of the major things that LinkedIn is useful for, but it's also a massive content sharing website. And you will be able to attend online webinars, you'll be able to reach out to people who are in the industry. you'll be able to reach out to your own university alumni. So I would encourage students to look for alumni from the university that you want to go to. Try reaching out to them on LinkedIn and try seeking their advice of what their experience was during the program, what their job hunt looked like, how long it was before they got a job, and how much time did it take after graduation for them to actually get that job. Find out all of those details. Among the other people that you can try and reach out to are university alumni, program administrators, and professors. My advice here again is that program administrators at the universities and professors in particular are very busy people. You might get lucky by sending an email to a program administrator asking about the course, and they might reply and give you the necessary information. But you have to understand that they are also inundated with emails, not just from aspiring students, but also current students. Similarly, with professors, they have to deal with a lot of stuff. They're exchanging emails with faculty, they're exchanging emails with their own students. So, unless you're really interested in a professor's research and want to potentially work with them, you can try reaching out to professors, but chances are that you might not hear back from them. But again, your best bet is always industry professionals because they have a better view of how the job market is turning out, and your university alumni because they have gone through the same process and they are more than willing to help you out, especially if they are in the industry that you want to be in. Similarly, like LinkedIn, depending on what field you're in, it might be useful to have a presence on Medium or Twitter or GitHub. Like I know most of venture capital professionals are on Twitter, and it's almost the same to not know what's going on VC Twitter. And I actually came to the game a little late. So my advice to everybody is like try to find out where the chatter is in the industry that you want to work in and create an online presence there. And by online presence, I don't just mean create a profile and be a passive consumer of all the content. Try to learn and create your own content. That's how you create your online presence. And this might be a good time to start doing that if you don't have too much to do, because if and when you eventually come start your masters, you're not going to have much time to do all of the social media stuff, which is important but also not as important as your coursework. So a good time to start is right now. Like that, journals and newsletters. If you know any good newsletters, any thought leadership that is published by prominent people in the industry, subscribe to those newsletters, read from there. One of the advantages that you will also see job postings in some of these newsletters. So especially if like you're in finance, there's a PE newsletter that goes out every week and they list jobs that some of the PE firms don't even list on LinkedIn, for example. So that's a good way to find jobs that you're really interested in. And finally, my advice is please find time to rest. This is a stressful time for everybody. It doesn't matter whether you've decided to come to the US for your masters or you're still exploring that. Do not stress out about it. Everybody is going through a tough phase right now. Everybody is trying to figure it out. So find time for yourself, because if you burn out, it's not going to be any use. And try to carry this advice through your master's program as well, because it should not be a surprise to you at this point, but the master's program is very, very stressful. Some subjects are obviously easier than others. Some semesters will really not have as much workload. It will depend on what program you're in. But generally speaking, going through 2 years of your master's program is incredibly stressful. And if you start burning out, it might be for naught. So try to balance out everything. That's my major advice. And I would like to hand it back to um, Olivia, and I can take questions on whatever I have talked about. If anybody wants to know more about the industry I'm in, I'm happy to talk about that as well.
Thank you, Mr. Varun, for those beautiful insights and experiences. So now, without any further ado, let's get into the question and answer session. Looks like we have some questions. Okay, so first one. After going to the US, are there any scholarships or reduction available in tuition fees?
That's a good question. Yes and no, meaning that a lot of universities do have tuition reduction programs. They will give you financial aid. However, you have to find out whether your university allows that financial aid for international students. Universities have a lot of regulations around this area. They have different guidelines on who is eligible to get these financial aids. So, for this information in particular, please feel free to email your program administrators. Sometimes universities will have resources listed on their website specifically for inquiring about financial aid. So go to your university's website, try to find those resources, and try to reach out to those people. And if you're in need of financial aid, if you're looking for any reduction in your tuition fees, they will give you all of the information necessary. Another thing is usually students go for teaching assistantships or research assistantships. And those are two of the most common ways to get some of your tuition fees reduced. Now, again, that does not happen at all of the universities. I was a teaching assistant at my university. However, Carnegie Mellon does not allow tuition reduction because of teaching assistantship for master students. So I did get paid, but my tuition was not reduced. So this goes back to my point that different universities have different guidelines, but definitely look it up, reach out to people at your universities and find out the information about financial aid.
Thank you. Next question. How likely are we to get a part-time job during our masters, considering a lot of natives are also laid off?
So a lot of part-time jobs on universities happen to be on-campus employment, like working at a library, working at some of the offices. A lot of universities have food establishments. I know a lot of friends who worked as um, food service employees while they were at the universities. So if the university is conducting full scale online classes, full scale online presence, then yes, you have a good chance of getting those jobs as easily as it would be last year. However, from what we're seeing currently, at least for the next semester, universities are trying to cut down on any activity that will get students close together. So there is a decent chance that those jobs might not be available, at least for the next semester.
Okay, next question. With a lot of companies laying off employees to sustain themselves in this pandemic, do you feel that an employment boom may take place in the next few years after the pandemic has passed to fill the vacancies?
Yes. So if you look at what happened around the 2001 bust, and then again around the 2008 bust, for a year, maybe a couple of years, companies were still trying to find their footing, essentially. There were some consolidations, some companies went out of business, but eventually opportunities arise from all of those busts. And it will take time, but eventually, yes, you will see startups come up, you will see greater acquisitions, you will see companies expanding their portfolios so that they can create more jobs. What the timeline is on that, it's hard to say. But just speaking from what has happened over the last 20, 30 years, this boom and bust cycle typically runs over the period of approximately a decade. So my sense, and I'm no expert at this, but my sense is that we might see the economy falter for the next couple of years, still companies still trying to find out how to best make, or rather how to make the best of the current situation, and then they will start hiring more. then they will start expanding their programs. Then they will actually start being more receptive to international students and begin sponsoring their visas again. So in maybe 2 or 3 years, we can start to see some optimism on that side.
Okay. What is your experience as a venture capital associate?
It has been very, very exciting. I was new to the venture capital space. Um, I had worked with startups before I joined the accelerator I was with before, but I had almost no experience actually doing all the finance stuff. And it was a learning opportunity as much as it was an opportunity for me to use my background and skill set. And the NYC startup ecosystem is second only to Silicon Valley. When times are good, there's an event happening almost every day. As long as you're proactive about wanting to go out there and meet new startups, meet other investors, there are a plethora of opportunities for you. There's a massive learning curve because depending on the kind of startups you invest in, there's a lot to learn, not just about your field, but also about the investment theory that your firm employs. So it was a learning experience for me as well, and I'm still learning.
Okay, next question. Is it reliable to do an internship in some other field which may or may not be my master's subject?
Um, I don't know if they can be a little more specific, but are you asking if it's okay to do an internship while you're doing your master's that is not relevant to the master's?
Yes, yes, exactly that.
It seems counter productive because eventually you want to land a job, and in the process of landing that job you want to be able to use your experience in the internship to leverage your abilities. And especially if you're one of the students who decided to do your masters right after you got out of your undergraduate program, then you don't have any experience in the interim that can count towards your skills. And you would typically want to get an internship in the same field that you want your job in. That's one thing. The second is that typically a lot of firms hire interns as a way of gauging if they can hire them as full-time employees. And a lot of the big firms do this, all the top consulting firms, the big four accounting firms, and a lot of smaller companies as well, because their pipeline becomes smaller, they become more efficient if they can hire the interns that have proven themselves once. So my sense is that if you do an internship that is not relevant to your master's at all, it can become counterproductive when you're actually searching for a job. And remember that in a typical 2 year master's program, you have only one chance at doing an internship. And if you do that in a completely different field and are not able to take advantage of it, then it's really not that much use.
Okay. Would you suggest to delay master's program for an on-campus experience, or should we go ahead with the remote learning option that most universities are providing now?
My advice in this case is that you will have to do a sort of risk reward analysis of doing your master's online and still trying to get a job in the US, because a huge value add of your master's is being physically present on campus, being able to attend the events that various societies at the universities host, being able to physically attend job fairs so that you can meet people from the industry, show yourself to them in person. So while you can get the learning online, you cannot get the experience that comes with the learning. Plus, it's really hard to do all of the group projects, or if your master's contains a lot of research work or lab work, then I imagine it's almost next to impossible to be able to do that if you're not physically present on campus. So this will depend on what program you're going for, but generally speaking, just getting or just doing the online courses for the amount of money that you would be spending on your master's program, it might not be worth it. And like I said before, universities have almost priced themselves out of the market. Fees are very high. So you might want to do a proper analysis of what am I learning, the kind of experience that I'm getting, what experience I'm not getting that others before me have got, and whether it is still valuable to do that master's online and then try to find a job in the US market.
Okay. Can you talk us through the procedure of getting an employer to sponsor a visa post your education?
Sure. So when you're looking for a job, most employers on their online application will list whether they're open to sponsoring or not. Some employers won't. Startups typically don't know much about this and they're willing to take the risk, so they usually won't. If you go to a job fair at your university, a lot of employers, to be able to be more efficient, they will already list on a board somewhere whether they're sponsoring visas or not. So in a way, you kind of know that big companies, popular companies, some of the companies that have a history of hiring international students, those are the ones that are definitely going to sponsor your visas. For other companies, especially if you work at smaller companies, if you work at investment firms, if you work at startups who have recently raised money and are looking to expand their teams, you have to discuss this with your employer. You have to let them know that you are on your OPT and eventually you're going to need sponsorship for your H1B. Be clear about that, and they might be willing to sponsor your visa. It also depends on some fields. I would like to give an example. When I did my internship, I was a business analyst at a startup that was building an ERP product. And out of the 7 software developers they had at the time, 5 of them were Indians on H1B visas. And this was a startup. This was very early stage. They had not raised a big round yet. So they had limited resources, but they actually saw the value in hiring those students and spending that money on sponsoring their visas. So as long as the company sees your value, the size more or less does not matter. You only have to be upfront about the fact that you are going to need your company to sponsor it.
Okay, next question. With a lot of dissatisfaction amongst the students with paying higher fees for remote learning, do you feel there could be a drop in students applying for admission?
Definitely on both sides of the US education system, meaning that students in the US, citizens, will also think twice before paying huge amounts of money for a master's or even an undergraduate program that they mostly can take by sitting at home. On the other end, I assume Indian students will also make that decision because typically we tend to take huge amounts of loans in order to be able to fund our education. And if you're not getting the whole experience, if you're not getting the whole value add of being on campus and are still paying the same amount of money, a lot of students and their parents, I feel it is legitimate to consider that it's not a good uh, way to spend your money, especially in the current situation. Maybe in a couple of years, the situation will improve. Universities will start having students on campus regularly. As a result of students dropping out previously, maybe they will make their programs better. Maybe they will reduce their fees. All of these things can happen. So it is definitely not too much of a stretch to imagine that it's okay to wait it out for a year and then reevaluate on whether I want to do my master's from the US.
Okay, we have one last question. While countries having lower population density, having faster recovery rates from corona, do you feel that there will be a jump in migrants traveling there for education, and is it advisable to do so?
Could you repeat the first part of the question? Sorry.
With countries having lower population density, having faster recovery rates from corona, do you feel that there will be a jump in migrants traveling there for education, and is it advisable to do so?
Probably not, because for starters, um, we are not exactly ahead of the curve in terms of either case reduction or actually large scale testing in the US. So even if in your home country there are no cases, people will be apprehensive of moving to the US until the administration here has gotten a better handle on COVID testing and other programs to reduce the chances of a second or third wave. So immediately, I'm going to say no. A lot of people feel safe in their own countries, so they might stay there for the foreseeable future. Eventually, probably, but it also depends on the US economy. Like if people are not hiring if companies are not hiring internationals, then it does not make sense to come over to the US, irrespective of whether you want to do your masters or not.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Varun, for answering all our questions. A feedback form will be circulated on the WhatsApp group. Please fill it and let us know your feedback. Now I invite Olivia to propose the vote of thanks. Over to you, Olivia.
Thank you, Mr. Varun, for speaking to us. We are grateful for the time and effort you took to share your thoughts and experiences with all of us. Since we are entering a new phase, your comments were very timely. I believe we can benefit immediately from this session. Your enthusiasm is contagious, and we hope to use your suggestions in our lives. Thank you again for your contribution. I also extend my gratitude and appreciation to our principal, the entire alumni committee, and the teachers for supporting and organizing such useful webinars even during these challenging times. Thank you everyone for attending and being a part of our today's webinar. We hope to see you all very soon. Requesting everyone to please fill in the feedback form circulated. This is Olivia Disa signing off for today.